My name is Hjalmar. I'm the CEO of a company called Watty. I've been invited here today by Roloff to explain, I think, how the audience know our company quite well. So I'm going to try to stay pretty short on time, and then I'll invite you to ask any questions you have to us about how we raised money, or how we didn't raise money, or how we recruited, or anything like that. And feel free to sort of challenge me on anything you want. Before I jump into that, though, I want to say just in a sentence why I'm here. So I think this is an incredibly important initiative, because I think it's very clear to anyone who's paying attention that AI machine learning is the next defining frontier of computation. And as a Swede, I'm very worried about what I see here. Because as a company trying to raise money, and I'm sure that I'll hear from some of you the same thing, talking with investors, you quickly realize that they don't really understand what's going on. 8 months ago, I contacted one of the leading Swedish tech journalists, and I said, this is crazy. We are building some of the coolest AI companies in the world in Sweden, and no one knows about it. This is a major story. And he wrote back to me and said, you know what, we don't really think that this is anything that people care about. And today, of course, it's a different story. 6 months later, it's more obvious. But I think for us to be relevant in this ecosystem, it's critical that we have the whole ecosystem, engineers, entrepreneurs, investors, really understanding what this is about. So I think it's extremely important to put on events like this, and we're happy to do anything we can to contribute towards that goal. And of course, it's critical for our company success, so we definitely have an upside in that as well. The story of Watty really started very, very humbly, with a very basic idea, which was that the energy consumption of every device in your home can be read from your electricity meter. It leaves some kind of signature in your total energy consumption, but no one can understand this data, even though there are a lot of products out there that can capture your energy data, and there's a lot of value in this data. No one really knows what to do with it. So we figured this is sort of a perfect application of machine learning. So we have a signal that's very noisy. We want to identify separate parts. And if we could do that, then every home in the world could sort of automatically become a smart home. We could understand everything about the energy consumption in that home just from this single data stream. So that would be a game changer for the whole energy market. And before this company, I was a co-founder in another company in the nanotech space, and I spent 18 months in sort of an R&D phase, which is the most maddening, depressing thing you can do, because you work like a madman and there are no tangible results. So that sort of breaks you down psychologically, at least it did for me. So I was so determined that whatever I was going to do next was going to be absolutely zero R&D. If I could figure out a business with a hammer, selling a hammer, I would be so happy to do it. So when we started looking into this, immediately it's we can do this, but only if the problem is completely figured out. This has to be easy peasy. So we actually were fortunate to have one of the incubators gave us 150,000 SEK just to do a feasibility study, just so that we could potentially later apply to this incubator. So we got this professor from KTH, 2 of his PhD students, to go through all the literature and implement a proof of concept of this problem. Turns out in the literature, the problem is basically solved. We did a basic implementation, seems feasible. So, off we go. So we started the company. We recruited a bunch of super smart, committed, newly graduates, some of them are here tonight, to start implementing these papers we found. And I had managed to hustle my way to one of the biggest data sets ever, 240 households in the UK, of energy use data. So great, we have data, it's in kind of exclusive, we have the methods, we have the engineers. So nothing could go wrong, it was great. And like Mike Tyson says, everything It's great, you have a plan until someone hits you in the mouth. And that's basically what happened with our company. So 8 months of working day and night around the clock, trying to get these papers to work. I'll never forget this, I think. So I was in the car with our CTO, and we had had a very rough day looking at all the results. And he said to me, Hjalmar, it's not just that nothing is working, it's worse. And I remember, like, how can it be worse? But then I realized what he meant. So he meant, like, we can't even tell if it's working or not. So if you're working in a machine learning field and you don't even, like, if it's broken, you can fix it. So we didn't even know if it was broken. And the reason for that was none of the data that we needed to build this company was out there. Like, people are so used to voice and image and all this stuff that they just assume that, you build an algorithm, you test it, it works, or it doesn't work. Well, in our case, who has millions of data on fridge freezer cycles on a refrigerator in a home in Sweden? No one. So we didn't even know if we were on the right track. We're pretty sure we weren't implementing this stuff, because in the real world we couldn't really replicate what we were seeing. So we made a really crazy bet and said, you know what? If the data isn't out there, let's take like half of our funding and let's develop some method of collecting data, bet all this money on collecting this data, and actually see if that might work. No one had really done it that way, and the idea there was to not rely so much on the traditional methods of sort of mathematically describing how it should work, but more go towards a neural network type of approach, and that requires, of course, a lot of data. So we ended up developing our own data collection system, hiring a bunch of people who only went into homes to collect data. And after about a year of doing this, we started seeing the first results that this was actually like a real viable way to do this. Building this company. And what was so cool, I mean, we started the company 3 years ago. So like this 18 months of R&D became actually longer this time. But what became pretty apparent was that no other company wants to do this. So we looked at all of our competitors, and they never had that conversation in the car, right? They were still just doing this other stuff. So suddenly, basically 18 months from being in the car, we were in 2 international benchmarks where all the major vendors in the world were compared. And we were the #1 company in both of those trials. And we have like American competitors who have raised hundreds of millions in funding, right? And we still outperformed them because we chose a better strategy. So that was a really pivotal moment for our company, and it created this barrier for competing with us. So Anthony, I'm officially inviting you to compete with us. It's a lot of fun, but unless you have as much data as we have, you're going to have a bad time, right? So we created this barrier to competitors that has made us a really special company. And that takes me to sort of my second point that I found, which was that you would expect that when we go out to investors and say, look, we found a way to collect ground truth data. Not only that, our product in itself generates even more proprietary data. So we have a self-enforcing way of producing a barrier of entry to other companies. And not only that, we've built the best performing platform in the world for doing this. Like, that sounds pretty cool, I think, like as a company. And I remember very clearly one of the investors who might be coming later today, I think, is Firm. They looked at this and they said, this sensor you have, could that maybe look a bit more like an Apple product? Thousand miles over there, were they thinking about, like, wow, how would Steve Jobs have done this? What's a shiny way of doing it? And we are in an AI paradigm that's 1,000 miles over there, where we're thinking about where this is going and how you can build a sustainable AI business over time. Europe and in the Nordics, that the most fundamental aspects, I think, of what the AI business is about is not something that the investor community here understands very well. And that's not to say that it's a bad investment community. They are great. I mean, they are fantastic, but they've spent their lives learning about e-commerce. They've spent their lives learning about payments, about streaming music, right? So they're great at doing that, but that's not, like, this is a new paradigm. So I think one of our key lessons is that even when you do the right thing, you have to expect to be misunderstood for like many years. Like, the reward is not immediate, even when you make the right tough choices. So that's certainly been our experience. But as time, I mean, one of the most rewarding things I think for any entrepreneur is that as time moves on, sort of the world can start to see your, like, when you start the company, you're the only one in the world who can see what the hell you're talking about. And as time goes on, more and more people can actually see what it is you're talking about. So we're heading in that direction. And I think I'll leave it at that until take questions. Thanks. 10 minutes, okay, perfect.
Does anybody know we have a second microphone? No?
We sure somewhere?
I think here we have. We can put maybe this. This one on? Or do we have a microphone? Let's see there. Okay. So anybody has any questions? Go.
So hello. My question is, how do they test the models in the data? How is that they use?
Okay, so I'm invited to bash academia, which I will happily do. So I would say that every single one of the papers we looked at had good intent. I mean, I don't think anyone really wanted to do anything unethical. But it might be a single line. It's like, we chose the appropriate sets of parts of the data to test. And that basically means you can remove anything you don't like to get any results you want. And that's a line in the paper, you can easily put it there. And if you read it with good intentions, you just assume that there was a reasonable way to do it. Another way, and journals that are not very good, it's very easy to game just with the metrics. So you can have an accuracy metric that is, let's say you want to predict when your stuff is on at home. So let's say you predict it's always off 100% of the time. You are now the owner of a 99% accurate model for when the stove is on. And if you are a reviewer and you don't really pay attention, you can let that through. And the metric is completely useless. But if someone's just reading it quickly, it looks like it's working. So those were the sorts of things that came up. Every paper will say there's not enough data out there. We really need better established metrics to do this. So it's not that they're sort of ignoring the problem. I think they're doing what they can with the data that's available. And one of the things that's great about running a company rather than staying in academia is that you actually have resources to do crazy stuff like going out and collecting your own data in a large-scale way.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone?
Just in the back.
Hi. I was impressed by that you don't seem to be worried about competition. First of all, I know that there's one company in Stockholm.AI that's doing language. That's going to be humble with that, but especially knowledge sharing in this community. Are investors worried about you going about talking about your technology?
Yeah, so I think so the first question was you're very aloof about having competitors. Is that really is that a show or is that true? I'm paraphrasing here, but and I think the second question is, do you have to be closed as a company in this industry and protective about what you're doing? And we certainly see a lot of companies doing that. Or is it okay to be open and talk and describe and show on meetups what you're implementing? I think when it comes to competitors, as I'm saying, it's really so if we take, for example, the company in Gothenburg, they make a piece of hardware that collects this data. And that to us is doesn't tell you anything about sort of how dangerous they are as a competitor. And I think it just comes down to the quality of your product is going to be the quality of your data, like the quality and the amount. And as long as we feel confident that we have a good strategy there, I think we can feel fairly confident. Then, of course, like for a business, having a great technology is just a start. You don't build a great company because you have a great technology. Specifically, that's the metric we're looking at. Again, talking about these two different worlds, I think like any more sort of platform play trying to differentiate on the technology, I mean, it's so clear, I think, that we're already in this sort of phase where Microsoft was making Explorer available for free. And they killed all other browsers. Like, this is what every single tech company is doing now. Like, even DeepMind, they're just publishing, making sure that no one creates any meaningful proprietary technology. So it's trying to have a long-term edge in an algorithm you built, we don't think is a very likely scenario, or in a platform, because someone like Microsoft can build a platform like Internet Explorer that they're going to be able to have enormous resources to put behind because they have this enormous business. They don't need to care about making money on their platform. So again, we just think it comes down to the data. And that actually answers the second question. So I can tell you, we're doing deep learning this way or that way. In 6 months, we'll probably do it in a completely different way. And in 2 years, it might be a completely new paradigm. So that's not really the sensitive information. But I think what that creates for companies actually a completely new defining secrecy around your data sets and who has access to those. And that's actually much more tricky because you need to have a lot of people have easy access to the data to work efficiently. But if that data leaks, you're in big trouble. So I think that's one of the new really big challenges that startups in this space are going to see, because it's tough to have time to deal with that stuff efficiently in a small company. Thanks.
I think we have time for one last question.
Okay, so I'm from Innova with a Swedish funding agency. So we are financing startups and established SME companies. And it's a very nice offer because it's not loan, it's not equity, it's actually money for free. But how much money would you need?
So I should have prefaced this talk by saying this is not an instructional video. The way we did it, going out and creating our own data sets, is not how you're supposed to be doing it. Right? So I would not recommend anyone to go out and raise a ton of money to start their own data collection. And I mean, just look at what the car companies are doing in collecting data for self-driving cars. So that is certainly going to be a very sort of expensive approach. What I think can be very, very inexpensive is to have lots of companies try implementing detecting different things in different types of data sets. These data sets are almost always actually owned by companies. Completely new dynamic to anything internet related. But the data sets currently are locked in somewhere. So probably the biggest thing, apart from funding lots of small teams trying this out, is trying to figure out how you can get big companies to see the value in working with these companies, opening up data to them, to find which data set contains these hidden nuggets of gold that no one has really thought about. And I think that's like, when I was 12 years old, I taught myself how to make a website. I sold my first website for 5,000 SEK. It was the worst website you ever saw. And I think this is like the era we're in right now with machine learning. Like, there's just a basic implementation blows people's minds. So I think for several years now, we're going to have so many of those things going on. So as I said, I think it's a great idea to fund those companies to figure out which of these are going to turn into huge markets, which ones aren't. But where the entrepreneurs really have to think, I think, is like, where can we get access to good enough or interesting enough data to get this off the ground?
Okay, so we're planning also collaboration between big companies and SMEs in next spring. So we'll put that ahead.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so one last question for me. So Hjalmar, you said investors and entrepreneurs, they think from different paradigms, and I'm sure Bjarke has a lot of interesting things to say about that as well. And specifically in AI, you said it seemed to be very far away from each other. But on the other hand, you say just now that because AI is partly hype, partly very hot, there might be a lot of crap ML out there. And at the same time, investors' task is to kind of sort through the mess and find out the most interesting properties worth of investing in. One thing, like what would you advise investors there? And the second thing is how do you come together? Because in the end, Watty still got funding. Funding, I mean, the same argument could be made for any company, right? That it's always hard, investors don't understand us, but at the same time, a synergy might be good, right? Of entrepreneurs having ideas and investors thinking of the potential more far away future risks and returns.
Yeah. So just to be very clear in sort of my claim about investors, it's not sort of they didn't think we were good enough and they turned us down. We do. It's much more we didn't speak the same language. So I just came back from the US. I met with some investors that were specialized in AI, and in 5 minutes they understood the whole picture. Now, our story, and I think this is true for most funding stories, you end up you find the investors who get what you're talking about. So our angel round was led by a group of engineers, getting involved in Ruud's old house. They built the entire Klarna platform, like the techiest people you'll ever find. And we had one meeting with them. 3 days later, we had the agreement in place because they got it, right? But they were like the most techy people you'll ever find. Now, in our latest round, we have EQT. EQT Ventures has the great benefit, I think, of being a new fund. So they can say from day one, okay, this is going to be huge. And they have the expertise and the network to actually vet the companies. So I think we spoke the same language as well. So I think it's from the investor point of view, I think you just, as much time that you spend understanding what metrics look for an e-commerce company, which is 20 years now, and that's what you need to do in the AI space. So it's just, I think it's just a question of investment and doing it. Again, now we even have the .ai, right? So we're basically 1998, right? Even the company's like, oh, we're a .ai company, And there's nothing wrong with that. The .com companies are still around. But it's so everyone in here, we're 20 years too early on this. I know it, right? Because it's 1998, roughly. So there are going to be a lot of crazy bets that from people who don't know so much. There are going to be a few extremely successful companies in Europe that I hope will stay here. So just 3 of the most incredible Swedish founders ever have built AI companies that's been acquired by Facebook, by Apple. We have Recorded Future in Gothenburg because Christopher is the smartest guy of all time. I think the Swedish investors should be all over these guys. They're superstars. But they couldn't make it here. They were too early. So I just hope that we sort of align on understanding where this is going and help each other out.
Cool. Thanks so much.